Well, we're now in a new year, and 2024 was remarkably bad for the Islamic Republic of Iran. The alliance Iran created in the Middle East collapsed. Iran's currency is slipping to new lows. Economic unrest in a country that is already troubled with an energy crisis. And then there's the election of Donald Trump, who Iran allegedly tried to assassinate. Joining us now for a look back and what to expect in 2025 is Kamran Matin, an associate professor of international relations at Sussex University in the UK. I'm Negar Moshahedi, and this is Eye for Iran. Kamran Matin joins us now from the United Kingdom. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
How would you define 2024 when it comes to the Islamic Republic of Iran? It really wasn't a good year for the Iranian establishment.
I agree. I think 2024 has been a year of a succession of setbacks and defeats in some ways, in certain, especially in the foreign relations and regional politics in which Islamic Republic has been involved, starting, of course, with the aftermath of the October 7th attacks and the way in which Iran's so-called proxy forces were involved, and how that involvement eventually led to Iran's direct confrontation with Israel, and how over time those proxy forces were either destroyed or significantly diminished, and therefore Iran's ability to project power regionally was significantly reduced, and that reached its apogee with the downfall of the Assad regime in Syria, which has been a really strategic defeat, if you like, or setback for Islamic Republic. And I think the regime is still recovering from that and trying to reconfigure their regional politics and their activities in the region.
If you could summarize the year for the Iranian establishment in one word, what would that be?
Disaster, probably. Because for a government whose domestic politics is so heavily dependent on its regional and international interventions and projects, from nuclear project to proxy forces, such massive changes in its international and regional power balance has massive domestic repercussions, from deepening of economic crisis, from people's being emboldened in their potential protests against the regime, in terms of how to deal with the new presidency in the United States. All of this have come together and created a very difficult environment for the Islamic Republic, all of which is even more difficult to deal with in light of Supreme Leader's deteriorating health and his age. So a lot of things have come together in a particular short period of time for the Iranian establishment at the moment.
Let's talk about that. Let's dig deeper into that aspect of how Iran's international and regional influence really affects the domestic hold that it can have on the country itself. So now we've got this energy crisis. We've got even the bazaar merchant class rising up and protesting the deepening economic crisis that you mentioned. Are we seeing all the ingredients for a revolution?
We can see all of these ingredients in place, but of course revolutions are dependent as much on the status of the state ruling over the society as it's about the society's level of organization and readiness for uprising. And of course, Iranian society has witnessed series of uprisings, the last of which is in a way still the repercussions of which still is continuing. The fact is that apart from the objective conditions which has been really deteriorating for the Iranian regime, the narrative, the ideological sort of story on which the hardship of Iranian people was justified by the government, that has also sort of collapsed. For decades, Iran has explained its massive investment in, for example, proxy forces or even nuclear project by saying this is the way in which Iran can be protected from war, from conflict, from internal turmoil, and so on. And all of this has sort of evaporated. Iran did get engaged with Israel directly, and there might be more installments in store coming over the next months and weeks and so on. And Iran basically has lost the ability of influencing the region in a way that it was supposed to then eventually lead to improvement of social and economic conditions internally, which I think brings us to one of the events in last year in Iran, which was the presidential election ahead of time because of Raisi's helicopter crash and so on, and the way in which it was engineered to bring Masoud Pezeshkian into office in the hope that he would be able to negotiate or renegotiate a deal with the West, with the United States over nuclear program, which would then relax some of the economic pressures Iran is under. Of course, at the time, it wasn't clear whether Donald Trump would win the elections, but now that has happened and Iran's regional position is weakened so much, it's unclear how Iran is actually able to negotiate with some sort of strengths to be able to extract any concession, indeed, from the United States and Western powers. So we have to wait and see what exactly Donald Trump is going to do once in White House. But the signs are not very positive, I would say, for Iranian state.
At the very least, people are predicting that Trump will, at the very least, bring back the whole maximum pressure campaign and more economic sanctions at the beginning. How do you suppose Iran is going to maneuver this? Do you feel that they would be able to use any kind of relationship or influence that they have with Russian President Vladimir Putin, given his closeness with Donald Trump?
That's a very interesting question, of course, and that leads us to another aspect of Iran's international relations, which is its more or less formal alliance with Russia in and around the Ukrainian war. Now, one of Trump's main promises, if you like, was that he would end the war in Ukraine one way or the other. And irrespective how that war is ended and what sort of settlement the two sides will agree to, that means that Russia is likely to restore its damaged relations with the West, with the United States in particular. And that also means in turn that Russia does not necessarily need to accommodate Iran's demands or needs in order to keep Iran on board in terms of supplying drones and other weapons to Russia to be used in Ukraine. So Iran also loses indirectly one of its instruments of shoring up its own domestic and regional power, because Russia is going through or likely to go through some sort of normalization with Europe and the United States. So that's not good news for Iran in terms of the war in Ukraine be ended during Trump presidency.
That's really interesting. So it looks like the Trump effect is already having a major impact even before he's officially inaugurated into office. Does that means that then Iran is losing the leverage that they had in their relationship and sort of this allyship with Russia that was really formed on, I guess, dependency in the region?
Indeed, I think it is losing or has lost to some extent that leverage, partly because one area in which was bringing Russia and Iran together was Syria, in which both of them were involved supporting Assad regime. So neither of them are there anymore. So what really binds Iran and Russia together is this wider tension each of these countries have with the West, with the United States. Now, Russia is of course, of a different scale and size and presence in international relations, and it's the likelihood of its normalization with the West, I think, has these repercussions for the Islamic Republic in terms of losing that kind of leverage, which it could to some extent exercise through Russia. And in terms of other, in the past, during maximum pressure in the first presidency of Trump, Iran did launch a number of attacks on ships and ports in the Persian Gulf against ships belonging to Arab countries allied with the United States. I don't think Iran is able to or dares to do something again in the period after October 7th, because I think the threshold for the United States to act militarily against Iran has significantly come down, and it's much easier, and probably Trump is much more willing to take on Iran, given how Israel has basically neutralized Iran's proxy forces, through which it could have created significant problems for US troops in the region, but also Israel itself. So what we hear from Iranian officials these days is mostly about basically a deal. So they are ready to make concessions. So really much depends on what really Trump is likely to accept in terms of concessions the Iranian regime is going to make. Absent that deal, there is only, or apparently, one way for Iran to create some sort of leverage, and that's going nuclear in terms of its nuclear project becoming militarized officially by conducting a nuclear test or something like that. But I am not sure they can do that without this being detected ahead of time, which would immediately provoke a military action, which is various American presidencies and administrations have always said they are not allowing Iran to have nuclear weapons. So that route is extremely dangerous for Iran, and the concessions will be of the kind which, if Iran is eventually accepting them, would transform it from within, and probably weakens it so much that actually popular uprising would be much more likely or less costly compared to the past.
It seems like Iran doesn't have a lot of options now. It seems like their options are very limited. What do you suppose the discussions are like amongst Islamic Republic officials? Is there internal strife, and have they lost legitimacy within their own supporters? Because like you said, what do? If they go nuclear, that could lead to a full-scale regional war. It wouldn't be in their interest to keep them, in power. But at the same time, what do they do then?
I think in order to really get a sort of image of what's going on within the establishment, one has to remember that Khamenei, the supreme leader, and more broadly Islamic Republic, has for decades relied on a single trope, which is you have to project power all the time. That's how you can rule internally, but also attract respect and concessions externally. And what's happened over the past year is that Iran has increasingly appeared not just to people outside Iran and people who are opposing Iran within Iran, the regime within Iran, but also to the supporters of the regime that Islamic Republic is increasingly impotent vis-a-vis its adversaries, and especially the way Iran reacted, for example, to Ismail Haniyeh's assassination in Tehran, to Nasrallah's, to the second attack by Israeli army against Iranian sites, to which no response has yet been kind of delivered. So I think within the regime, and especially this got even worse after Assad's fall, and a lot of people asking, why Iran didn't intervene, and of course, you remember Khamenei in that famous speech basically declared this impotence that American and Israelis had closed all the roads and so on and so forth. So in the past, usually you had this story that the hardliners, IRGC versus the reformists, trying to kind of chart a road, a path in between these two positions. At the moment, I'm not sure the so-called hardliners actually have any realistic cards to play. So Islamic Republic could make a radical turn in its international relations if Khamenei is not in place. So, one way for Islamic Republic to somehow kind of survive the current crisis is a supreme leader dies naturally or unnaturally, a new leader comes in. that person can blame all the problems in the past on the preceding kind of previous leadership, and then try to kind of open up. Something like what Jolani does in Syria, right? He was until a few weeks ago on everybody's terrorist list. Now he's wearing suit and tie and so on, and he's trying to be moderate. And of course, a lot of people buy into it because they want to see a stable Syria. So Iran, I mean, it's not impossible that Islamic Republic might go down that route. And of course, a few weeks ago or a couple of months ago, there were quite unusual statements by some people very close to Khamenei's son, Mujtaba, who has been tipped to succeed him for many years now. And those people who spoke in favor of his leadership were quite unusual in their criticism of the existing leadership. I mean, Mujtaba's father, which is really is quite incredible. I mean, it suggests that at least sections of Iranian elite believe that Khamenei is no longer part of the solution to the problems of Islamic Republic, but it might be actually part of the problem. But whether this is going to happen in through existing constitutional route or some sort of de facto coup takes place, we don't know yet. But as I said, Khamenei, if he goes, there might be some way for Islamic Republic to change its course and therefore be able to rehabilitate itself internationally and reduce economic pressure within Iran.
Does that in some way signal potentially fear amongst Islamic Republic officials, or can nothing escape the establishment there?
I think there is definitely fear among them. Of course, they, in their official rhetoric, they won't reveal that. But I think that you can see certain level of confusion among different parts of the establishment when it comes to regional issues, to Syria, to United States, and so on, and the impending negotiations or talks potentially with Trump administration over Iran's nuclear project. So I think Khamenei is trying hard these days to reunify ruling elites around a compromise plan, of which we are not, of course, very well informed. But what I see in Iranian state media is that there is more talk about trying to make a deal with Trump rather than the usual kind of rhetoric of confrontation and resistance and so on.
So what makes this different than 1979 in terms of the conditions in place and the weakening of Iran, both internationally, regionally, and domestically?
I think it really, much of it has to do with organization. At the 79, during that period, the Iranian clerical or clergy class enjoyed access to an extremely wide and nationwide network of mosques and seminaries, which became basically platforms for agitation and organization. And this was had a counterpart in the fact that the Shah's regime, however brutal it was no way comparable to the extent to which Islamic Republic is prepared to use violence against unarmed protesters. So this came together, and I think enabled the revolutionary movement at the time to overcome the Pahlavi regime. At the moment, one area in which Islamic Republic has been markedly successful has been the elimination of any opposition force or opposition figure who could play a sort of charismatic and unifying role in the way in which Khomeini himself did in the lead up to the revolution in 1979. So, for example, we have to remember that Iran has assassinated hundreds of dissidents in Europe alone. It has infiltrated many organizations, opposition groups, and so on. And the infighting between the opposition groups also has led to the relative weakness of them in terms of their ability to kind of create a platform which is able to reach different sectors and classes of Iranian society. Now, that might change if people actually, see the weakening of Iranian regime's repressive organs such as IRGC or Basij and so on, or whether those organizations themselves are weakened because of the confusion and sense of defeat which they have, following the events recently. But I think, as far as I can see, organized opposition with actual objective influence and network within Iran is probably the main reason why Islamic Republic is even in place now, because all the other ingredients are in place. Iranian economy in tatters. Repression, executions, discrimination, gender apartheid, all of this creates a situation in which at best probably 10-15% of Iranian population supports the Islamic Republic, and yet the regime is able to stand precisely because there isn't a strong enough opposition to actually present itself as an alternative which can, replace the Islamic Republic.
That's an excellent analysis, because you see a lot of opponents of the Islamic Republic on social media after the fall of Bashar Al-Assad in Syria saying, over to you, Iran, you're next. Or you even see Israeli officials like Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu himself saying, Iran, now it's your turn to rise up. But it's really not that simple.
It is not. I think organization and also a discourse, a political discourse, which is simultaneously appealing to different sections of Iranian society. That is very crucial, which was why, the Women, Life, Freedom movement was almost unique in the history of post-revolutionary period in Iran in its ability to mobilize different groups within Iran, from, marginalized nationalities to women to even queer groups, to working classes, to middle classes. Everybody was finding something in that particular slogan, because each of these three words really refer to a particular area of discontent in Iranian society. Gender apartheid, women, life, social and economic crisis, and class division and so on, and freedom, of course, political liberties and so on. And it was why I think Islamic Republic concentrated so much on dividing the movement which coalesced around this particular slogan, which of course is still there and can be utilized for creating what I would describe as a hegemonic discourse, because no revolution is able to succeed by mobilizing only one particular social constituency or agency, whether it's working class or women or minorities. You need something which brings all of them together. And that is why I think this slogan was so important and dangerous to Islamic Republic. And one can only hope that it can be reutilized by opposition in a better and more effective way in the future.
But it did fail, and the Islamic Republic, in that sense, did prevail. Was that all due to creating more division, like you said, or is there something more to it?
Well, I wouldn't quite agree that it has failed, because yes, there is no street protests, but I think it created a sort of transformation in, if you like, subjective perceptions of Iranians vis-a-vis the regime, especially when it comes to women. The scenes you get from Iranian cities and how women are basically challenging the authorities in terms of compulsory veiling and so on, it's just unbelievable. We could not imagine this in a few years ago. But yes, in terms of street protest and actually demonstrations, the combination of ruthless suppression of the protesters as well as division within the opposition, and the way in which I think Iranian regime was very skillfully utilized a particular kind of Iranian nationalist discourse to create divisions within the movement, because of course, Women, Life, Freedom movement, unlike the previous movements, were driven especially from what we in Iranian political discourse is often described as the margins of Iranian society, both metaphorically, different marginalized classes, but also almost literally, because Baluchistan or Kurdistan, this particular minority areas in Iran which had this extra level of repression and oppression and exploitation and so on, and they were leading the demonstrations. And the Iranian regime was able to use the age-old, I think, tactic of attributing separatism or disintegration of Iran, to that kind of movement, which had some resonance within some sections of the opposition, unfortunately, and that, I think, led to division and eventually disintegration of whatever coalition had emerged at the time among certain sectors of Iranian opposition groups abroad.
Let's go back to Syria. For a lot of Middle East watchers, the fall of Bashar al-Assad was sudden. Could Syria be Iran's Vietnam, so to speak?
I think there are some parallels, but on the other hand, Iranian state, I think, is more consolidated than the Assad regime. The Assad state or Ba'athist state in Syria never enjoyed more than 20% of active support. There were times during which it made some sort of tactical alliance with certain non-Alawi sectors of Syrian society, especially the rural population, which Hafez Assad, the father of Bashar al-Assad, in the 70s and 80s was able to sort of ally with against the urban elite, the liberal sort of opposition. But this fell apart after Cold War because Syria no longer received geopolitical rents from the Soviet Union to be able to continue subsidizing rural economy so that the rural population would remain politically loyal to the state. And that meant that over time, the Ba'ath state was reduced to an Alawi elite, which at best, as I said, it was a very small minority within Syrian society. Iranian state, on the other hand, historically has been, relied on Shia Islam and Persian nationalism or Iranian nationalism, and these two still exist. So while Iranian regime is increasingly fragile, I'm not entirely sure it could be seen exactly in the same light as Assad regime, and certainly in terms of the multiplicity of significant armed groups which we see in Syria today. We don't have anything comparable to that in Iran today, which might be actually a positive thing if we think in terms of a less bloody transition within Iran if the Islamic Republic falls eventually.
So much of what we saw in Syria was sort of a dominoes effect of what was going on with what was happening to Hezbollah due to the severe blows from Israel. I don't think that Turkey would have encouraged or supported the rebel forces had Hezbollah not been so weakened. Do you see that as a dominoes effect, and is Iraq next? Because we're hearing of some, rumblings happening in Iraq as well. Is this going to be the next in this fall of the so-called axis of resistance?
I mean, in Iraq already there are signs of pacification, if you like, of Iran's proxy forces. They have agreed not to attack Israel, and the Sunni Shia division within Iraq, the balance of forces, if you like, demographically as well as economically and socially is much more close if you compare to the Alawis in Syria versus the rest of the society. So I think that there are possibilities for turmoil in Iraq, but so far not much has happened, and I don't know personally enough about Iraqi politics. But I think the domino effect is more in terms of we can see how it relates to Iran itself, that as one proxy force or allied state is weakened, the effects travels into Iranian domestic politics and how Iran is able to or not able to construct kind of alternative forms of regional power or influence. And in the absence of that, I think a major kind of pillar on which Islamic Republic has stood over the decades is gone, and that makes it very unstable and fragile.
And what about the Houthis? They seem to be sort of the last man standing in this axis of Iran.
Indeed. I think Houthis' relation with Iran is slightly different than compared to Hezbollah or Iraqi Shia groups. I think Houthis' attacks on Israel is as much about trying to gain legitimacy for Houthi government in the Arab world and Muslim world, as it's about simply supporting Palestinians as they claim. As you know, following the civil war, we have two rival governments within Yemen, right? So Houthis are just one authority. So there is this competition about who is going to basically be the ruler of the entire Yemen. And for that, I think Houthis see the Palestinian case as an important one in terms of showcasing their commitment to a transnational or Arab Muslim kind of cause. And Iran, of course, has helped them because their interest has contingently sort of intersected. Otherwise, a lot of listeners and viewers would know that Houthis follow a particular strand of Shiism, Zaydism, which is considered heretical by the 12 Shias who are in Iran. So I don't think the ideological link is not as strong as people think. In fact, they are historically have been quite hostile to each other, the Shias in Yemen and in Iran. But I think it's this geopolitical and political dynamics which has brought them together. And I have seen reports about President-elect Trump wanting to increase attacks on Houthis. So we have to wait and see how United States react. And there have been many more attacks recently on them by Israel and by the US-led coalition. So it may well be that they will also be pacified over time, especially if Iran itself is weakened. And maybe one of the elements in the future talks between Iran and US would be Iran stopping its support of supply of advanced weapons to Houthis, in which case, of course, they are not able to sustain the kind of attacks they have been doing up to now.
So that's interesting. That could be one of the concessions then to come forward with the Trump administration. Yeah. And we're already seeing the U.S.-led coalition increasing strikes against the Houthis after almost a year of pretty much doing nothing. Let's talk about Saudi Arabia, another big player in the region. Seems like Syria is getting close to Saudi Arabia with the new administration there. And we just heard that recently Saudi Arabia executed 6 Iranian nationals for alleged drug trafficking. What is that going to do to an already shaky relationship between Iran and Saudi Arabia?
Again, I think Iran is in no position to really deteriorate its relations with Saudi Arabia. I mean, Saudis charted a very, I would say, pragmatic path over the last couple of years. When Iran attacked Saudi oil installations in 2019, and Donald Trump did not, launch attacks on Iran in retaliation, I think Saudis at that point sort of decided and realized that they can't quite rely on the United States against Iran. So the process of de-escalation with Iran began, which eventually, with Chinese mediation, reached its conclusion. So at the moment, I think Iran has enough weaknesses not to wanting, create another problem for itself. And in terms of Saudi's role in Syria, I think it's a bit early to suggest, because I think Saudis as well as United Arab Emirates are quite concerned about Turkish hegemony in the Levant, and they might try to, for example, persuade Donald Trump to stay in Syria in terms of those a couple of thousand troops which are there in Syria to try to, by supporting the Kurdish forces in Syria, create a counterbalance against Jolani or Ahmad Shah's administration in Damascus. But historically, I think Saudi Arabia has been quite concerned about any form of groups or states which are close to Muslim Brotherhood. And both Turkey and Hayat Tahrir Sham or HTS are, of course, branches of Muslim Brotherhood. So we have to see, what happens over the next few months. But of course, I mean, Saudis, if they realize that Ahmad Shah is going to stay in power, they might try to come to sort of understanding with them. But it's not quite clear where things go at this point in Syria.
And just to conclude, Kamran, where do you see Iran going in 2025? Do you see Iran kind of laying low and being quiet, given how weak that they have become and what a disastrous year 2024 was for them, as you had mentioned and described yourself? Or do you see Iran, like you mentioned, going down that dangerous path of a nuclear Iran at all costs?
Well, as you know, prediction in political science is the least attractive thing to do. But I think there will be, significant developments or changes in Iran, because absent going nuclear, which as we discussed, it's quite dangerous and risky for Iran, then Iran has to sort of come to some sort of understanding and deal with the United States in order to really reduce this economic crisis in Iran, which is bound to lead to actually protest and uprising and so on. And once uprising begins, I think it's very difficult this time around to contain it. So it may well be that 2025 would be the year or the amount of time that needed for new Trump administration's pressures to kind of bring Iran to the point of making changes to its policies. So I'm not sure that those changes happen within 2025 or not, but I think it's a very decisive year in terms of where Islamic Republic goes. And who knows, Khamenei increasingly looks very ailing, and if he dies or is no longer able to lead, then we have succession issue in Iran, which actually adds another layer of very complex situation within Iran, because unlike the time Khamenei himself became supreme leader, at the moment there is no one within Iranian establishment who has the kind of authority around which other figures would sort of coalesce. At the time, Rafsanjani was able to make up some story about Khomeini favoring Khamenei, and everybody bought into that story, and Khamenei became leader. But I don't think that is possible to happen again. So the infighting might actually intensify, and that itself adds to all the other problems which we have discussed. So 2025 will be a very, very difficult year for the Islamic Republic, I think.
A year of change. We just don't know which change that's going to go. And like you said, if the opposition can put aside their differences, it could be potentially the year of a revolution, even potentially.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time and analysis. I really enjoyed our conversation. That's Kamran Matin.
Thank you very much for having me. Thanks.
If you enjoyed this episode, hit the like button and leave us a comment. We'd love to know what you think. The Eye for Iran podcast series is created by Iran International, the go-to destination for expert Iranian news in both Farsi and English. For more, head to our dedicated English website, iranintl.com/en.